From friendly ducks that crash and burn to rides said to be haunted, here are the creepiest abandoned amusement parks. Number 10. Okpo Land, South Korea. Okpo Land was at one point the most impressive amusement park in all of Asia, but in May of 1999, it closed down overnight. It quickly became an abandoned eyesore, slowly rotting in the hills over the nearby city of Okpo on Geoje Island in South Korea. If you're looking for the creepiest amusement park ever, this one is at the top of the list. Since the day it was abandoned, it has sat as is, collecting dust and horror stories. Okpo Land was extremely popular because of its proximity to the Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering Shipyard. The area had a huge population of families with disposable income, and they often flocked to the park on weekends and nights. One of the main rides in the park was the duck train, which is known to have killed at least one person in the early 1990s. One of the duck trains derailed, crashed to the ground, killed one person, and injured a few others. After that, the ride lived on for another few years until in 1999 when one of the trains derailed yet again and killed another youngster. Following the accident, the owner of the park vanished, and Okpo Land was closed down immediately. The amusement park remained hauntingly abandoned from 1999 until 2011, when it began getting demolished. All that's left now are the bones of an ancient 90s relic. Number 9. Pripyat Amusement Park, Ukraine. The abandoned amusement park in Pripyat Town is definitely the most famous one on the list today. It's located in the small town that was abandoned during the cataclysmic Chernobyl disaster of 1986. It was open one day and closed the next. As you probably know, the people from the town had just enough time to grab their belongings and make a run for it as the nuclear reactor was melting down and spewing radiation into the air. And so, when you visit the Pripyat amusement park today, it looks exactly as it did in the hours before the meltdown. And it's definitely a haunting place to behold. In fact, all of Pripyat and the area surrounding Chernobyl is super creepy. There are hundreds of little wooden houses that have gone to ruin, broken schools, entire apartment complexes left to be trashed and vandalized, and the most famous Ferris wheel in the entire world still waiting for its guests. What makes this amusement park so much creepier than the others is the fact that it's seriously irradiated. Nowhere else on Earth can you find an irradiated theme park where you could potentially get radiation sickness. And even though most of the place is actually relatively safe, there are still a few areas, like right under the Ferris wheel, that show high levels of radiation. As for the remainder of the park, it's basically just rusting away to nothing. Every window of the town has been shattered, everything that was once shining metal is now rusted, and the trees and forest have begun to reclaim the Pripyat amusement park, making a visit here exceptionally eerie. Would you ever visit a place like this? It seems like the perfect place to get incredible photographs of a time and place lost in history, but the risk of radiation exposure is high. Let me know if you'd ever go here in a comment below. And while you're at it, remember to hit the subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed already, you're missing out. Number 8. Dadipark, Belgium. Dadipark in Belgium is the oldest amusement park in all of Europe. It was first opened in 1950 in the small town of Dadizele, which is close to the French border. The small town was already a tourist attraction, but the amusement park really made it boom. In the earliest days, Dadipark was a playground used to occupy the children while their families visited the nearby basilica, but it soon evolved into an entire theme park. By the 1980s, there were all kinds of rides operating and loads of tourists showing up to check out the massive park. Its main attraction in the 80s was its 2,600-foot, 800-meter suspension bridge, which made it the longest in Europe at the time. But everything went bad quickly after that. The rides were too run down and they began to cause accidents. The last brutal accident was in 2000, when a 9-year-old boy was separated from his arm when using the Nautic jet ride. After this incident, people began to complain about the safety of the rides at the park. Visitors stopped visiting the park, and eventually, it fell into ruin. It was originally closed in 2002, with the owner saying it would only be closed for a year for renovations and maintenance. But the cost would have been way too high. There were also way bigger amusement parks all over Europe by then, and people weren't that interested in Dadipark's kiddie rides. For the 10 years that followed, the rides sat completely still, covered in graffiti, and being steadily reclaimed by nature. It was definitely a pretty ghoulish place. However, the demolition of Dadipark began in 2012, and now there's nothing left except the memories of the town haunting the forest. Number 7. Gulliver's Kingdom, Japan. Leave it to the Japanese to make an entire theme park around the novel Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. The park was originally built next to Mount Fuji and very close to Japan's famous suicide forest. It was also built very close to the former headquarters of Aum Shinriko, the religious cult responsible for 13 brutal deaths in the tragic Tokyo sarin nerve gas attack of 1995. In effect, the entire theme park was built around a giant model of Lemuel Gulliver tied to the ground, just like in the famous scene from the book, and the park itself was built between two of Japan's most horrendous places. Between cults and suicides, this amusement park didn't really have a lot going for it. Nobody wanted to visit the park because of all the terrible places it was near. Still, it operated for a fair amount of time, starting in 1997. The scenery was fantastic, the rides were enjoyable, and it was a weird enough novelty to draw visitors from all over the country. However, it had to close in 2001 because interest faded. Nobody wanted to journey through such horrible locations just to reach a weird theme park. According to BuzzFeed, the suicide forest in Japan, which overshadowed this park, is a location where many people come to end their lives, coming in second only to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Since 1950, it's believed that over 500 people have taken their own lives in the forest. I wonder how many ghosts or spirits of the deceased have found their way over to this abandoned theme park. It scares me to think about it. Number 6. Encore Garden, Taiwan. Encore Garden in Taiwan is an urban explorer's paradise. Is it creepy? Absolutely. It's also got a pretty interesting history. You see, Encore Garden first opened in 1981 on the outskirts of Taichung, the third biggest city in Taiwan. It quickly became one of the most popular tourist attractions on the island nation. In the 1980s alone, they were getting around 1 million visitors annually. That's a pretty good number considering the times. However, after the destructive earthquake of 1999, known locally as the 9/21 earthquake, nearly 2,500 people were killed, 100,000 were left homeless, and the country lost billions of dollars in damage. In the aftermath of the disaster, it didn't look like anyone felt like going to amusement parks anymore. Encore Garden did eventually reopen, but all of its coolest rides had been severely damaged or altogether destroyed. Visitor numbers dwindled, and eventually the amusement park shut down. But it's still there today. It's been completely taken back by Taiwan's jungle. But what remains peeking through the foliage is incredibly creepy. If you want to visit this place, you're going to have to take some buses and do some walking. But it's well worth the trip if you like creeping yourself out. All the rides are still there, including the carousel, the decaying game center, and even the bumper cars. The bumper cars happen to be the most popular attraction today, seeing as how they've literally been sucked into a sinkhole and you have to wade through a few feet of mud if you want to try and climb into one. Number 5. Jazzland New Orleans. New Orleans has always been a pretty spiritually interesting and paranormally spooky place. That's why there's nothing creepier than an abandoned theme park in New Orleans. I'm talking about a place called Jazzland. It was a very popular tourist attraction until August 2005 when Hurricane Katrina basically destroyed all of New Orleans. The waters rose at least 6 feet, 2 meters high throughout the entire Six Flags amusement park. It turned concession stands upside down, it transformed roller coasters into submerged sea snakes, and it basically degraded the entire amusement park into a disgusting swamp. With all the salt from the ocean corroding away the rides, about 80% of the park equipment was destroyed in just a few weeks. Unsurprisingly, the only ride that mostly survived the destruction was the Batman roller coaster. Of course it was the Batman roller coaster. As you can probably imagine, such dramatic destruction was deemed too expensive to fix by the Six Flags Corporation, and so the amusement park fell into absolute disrepair. And now, it is hauntingly silent. Jazzland is now a ghost town haunted by the forgotten screams of children and the horrible sounds of crashing waves. The clowns are muddy, the mermaids are smashed, and the entire park is now only visited by urban explorers and ghost hunters. Though keep in mind it is illegal to enter the park. You do it at your own risk. Number 4. Dogpatch USA, Arkansas. Dogpatch USA is probably the creepiest place on earth. There's nothing that makes me feel like I'm about to be murdered quite like an abandoned Arkansas theme park. This place looks like the scene from a horrific Friday the 13th movie, or maybe The Hills Have Eyes. The park started its life in 1968 as a potential theme park that centered around Lil Abner, which was a popular comic strip back in that era. In case you weren't around in the 1960s and 70s, Lil Abner was a comic strip about people who lived far out in the hill country, with characters such as Daisy Mae, Mammy, and Pappy Yoakum. In any case, it was widely popular, even spawning a Broadway musical and 2 film adaptations. To put it bluntly, Dogpatch USA was a hillbilly theme park. And as you can imagine, A hillbilly theme park didn't really translate well going forward from 1968, but it was certainly a good try. The park was super successful at first, with around 300,000 visitors in the first year. However, by the middle of the 1970s, the hillbilly craze was pretty much over. A lot of it had to do with societal views at the time. Sensibilities changed. People slowly stopped going to the park. It began to break down, and Dogpatch ultimately closed for good in 1993. Today, Dogpatch Park makes me think about the Blair Witch Project a little too much. I consider myself a brave person, and I'm not even sure I would want to skulk around this creepy abandoned park at night. What do you think? Would you do it? Let me know in the comments below. Number 3. Dreamland Japan. Nara Dreamland was supposed to be Japan's version of Disneyland. According to Metro News, the park was built in 1961 as a direct reimagining of a wildly popular American theme park. Unfortunately for Japan, it never quite got as popular. They just didn't have the characters. It operated for around 40 years with moderate success until the park began to decline in popularity and fall into disrepair in the late 90s. By 2006, Dreamland was simply not worth the effort, and it was shut down and ultimately demolished in 2016. However, for those 10 years in between, the park sat abandoned and was one of the creepiest places in Japan. What's really amazing is how quickly nature takes back abandoned places. The roller coaster basically looked like it was turning into one giant bush, while other rides were completely overtaken by vines and wildlife. Of course, Tokyo now has its very own Disneyland, but what happens when that too is abandoned in 40 years? Will Woody and Buzz haunt the remains of the park? It's almost too distressing to think about. Number 2. England's abandoned parks. England is absolutely riddled with derelict theme parks. Rather than talk about one specific park, let's take a look at some of the totally forgotten and creepy parks still rotting away in England. The thing is that before the invention of big corporate theme parks, there were lots of smaller theme parks all over the world. This phenomenon is similar to how big-name shopping centers overtook all the mom-and-pop vendors and put them out of business. For example, there's Frontierland, which according to the BBC finally closed after 92 years of entertainment. Despite its rich history, it was left abandoned with its rides disassembled and shipped to buyers. Then we have Blobbyland, which appears to be sinking deeper and deeper into the forest. What was once a joy for kids is now an actual nightmare. Next up is Camelot, the park in Lancashire that had been based on the legend of King Arthur. While that might have had plenty of visitors in the 90s, it's not very cool anymore. All those rides like the Jousting Knights and the Pendragon Plunge closed in 2012, and now the castle theme park is abandoned, full of medieval mannequins who turn the park into a creepy place at night. Of course, during the day they just lie motionless on the concrete, but who really knows until you pay a visit? Number 1. Geauga Lake, Ohio. Ohio is a pretty fascinating place, and depending upon where you go in the state, a lot of it kind of looks abandoned. But the coolest abandoned place in all of Ohio is definitely Geauga Lake Amusement Park. It also has an extremely rich history. In the late 1800s, the man who owned the property used it as a picnic grounds so that train travelers could take a break and enjoy time in his park. He built a dance hall and every type of amusement and family-friendly diversion. It became a hugely popular site and even had a steamboat riding around in the lake with a dance floor in the back. In 1887, the park was officially established. In 1889, it added a steam-powered carousel. The first roller coaster went up in 1925, and it continued to expand and prosper for a time. But then the park was hit by a tornado in 1942. It was engulfed in flames in 1952. And in 1970, SeaWorld Ohio opened across the street. But the park kept trudging along, opening new rides until finally it was transformed into a Six Flags in 2000. It became a massively popular theme park with lots of the newest and most expensive rides. Then, after hundreds of millions of dollars, Six Flags shut down abruptly in 2007. The only park operating was the water park, but that too shut down in 2016. The massive park is now completely abandoned after nearly 150 years of operation. It's one of the largest abandoned theme parks in the entire world. Would you visit one of these abandoned theme parks at night? Let me know in the comment section, and thank you for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. See you again next time for another great video.